The Dragon's approach triggered every electronic system within a 100-mile radius. Cell phones erupted in static, satellite networks collapsed, military communication grids fragmented into white noise. Beneath the burning sky, Dr. Aisha Kapoor watched from the roof of the National Geological Research Center in New Mexico. Her team had been tracking quantum anomalies for years, dismissed as crackpot theorists until this moment. The creature wasn't just destroying, it was sampling. Massive tendrils of metallic plasma extended from its body, probing buildings, infrastructure, collecting data with surgical precision. "It's not random," she muttered into her satellite phone, one of the few communications devices still functioning. "This is a systematic assessment." 50 miles away, a convoy of military vehicles raced across the desert, led by Colonel Marcus Wright. He'd spent decades preparing for unconventional threats, but nothing in his extensive training could have prepared him for this. The Dragon's arrival had been preceded by a complete electromagnetic pulse that had disabled most modern technology. But not everything. Wright's convoy carried a secret, experimental EMP-shielded vehicles developed in black-budget programs most government officials didn't know existed. Each truck was essentially a mobile research station, packed with equipment designed to operate when everything else failed. Satellite feed. His communications specialist, Sergeant Elena Rodriguez, called out, "We've got partial imaging." The Dragon moved with impossible grace, its body defying known physics. Where it touched infrastructure, materials seemed to liquefy and then rapidly restructure, not destroyed, but transformed. Buildings didn't collapse. They were systematically deconstructed, their component materials reorganized into complex alien geometries. In the heart of a small research facility outside Albuquerque, Dr. Wei Zhang watched the live feed with a mixture of terror and scientific fascination. His life's work, research into quantum entanglement and nonlinear dimensional theory, suddenly seemed both completely irrelevant and critically important. "It's collecting," he said to himself, fingers flying across a reinforced computer terminal. "Not destroying, collecting." The Dragon's primary body was approximately 2 kilometers long, but that was deceptive. Tendrils of quantum energy extended far beyond its physical form, probing, measuring, analyzing. Each movement was calculated, each interaction a complex data-gathering exercise. Aboard an experimental military aircraft flying just beyond the creature's immediate range, a team of specialists monitored every possible frequency. Captain Julia Rice, Karen's younger sister, managed a specialized signals intelligence unit. Their job was simple: observe, record, survive. "Thermal readings are off the charts," her lead technician reported. "But it's not heat as we understand it. It's more like information density." The Dragon seemed to pulse with an internal rhythm, its metallic scales shifting colors in patterns that suggested complex communication. No single wavelength could capture its true nature. It was simultaneously matter and energy, solid and fluid, present and somehow elsewhere. In downtown Los Angeles, survivors huddled in underground parking structures and reinforced basements. The initial panic had given way to a strange collective calm. Humanity had always imagined alien encounters would be dramatic, cinematic. This was something else entirely. A methodical, almost surgical invasion that seemed more interested in information than destruction. A group of network engineers, trapped in a fortified data center, discovered something extraordinary. Their backup systems, designed to survive nuclear events, were capturing fragments of the Dragon's communication. Not language, something far more complex. Mathematical patterns, quantum signatures that suggested a form of intelligence beyond human comprehension. "It's mapping us," one of them whispered. "Not just our cities, our entire technological ecosystem." Colonel Wright's convoy reached a predetermined fallback point, a hardened research facility built into the side of a mountain. As they entered, massive blast doors sealed behind them, creating a sanctuary that hummed with suppressed technological potential. "We're not going to fight this," Wright told his assembled team. "We're going to understand it." Outside, the dragon continued its methodical assessment of humanity. And humanity, for the first time in its history, was forced to do something it had never done before. Wait. Observe. Learn. The abandoned nuclear research facility wasn't just a refuge. It was a technological marvel that had been prepared for scenarios far beyond standard military contingencies. Hidden deep within the Appalachian Mountains, the facility had been designed as a last resort sanctuary for humanity's most critical scientific and technological resources. Javier Martinez didn't look like a world-saving genius. At 19, he seemed more like a street kid who had wandered into the wrong place. His tattoos told stories of growing up in a tough neighborhood in Chicago, each ink line a memory of survival. But his hands moved with a precision that belied his appearance. Fingers dancing across sound mixing boards, quantum frequency analyzers, and experimental communication arrays. "We're not looking at this right," he muttered, connecting the series of modified speakers that looked like they'd been cobbled together from professional sound equipment and military-grade electronics. Sound isn't just vibration. It's information. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched him work, seeing something most others missed. Javier wasn't just a sound engineer. He was a natural systems thinker. Where traditional scientists saw barriers, he saw possibilities. A tremor ran through the facility, not from an earthquake, but from the massive experimental generators that powered their hidden sanctuary. The mountain itself seemed to vibrate with suppressed technological potential. Across the main research hub, a diverse team of survivors worked with intense focus. Military personnel mixed with civilian scientists. Academics collaborated with former tech entrepreneurs. The usual hierarchies had collapsed. Survival demanded something new. Dr. Weizhong, who had been monitoring quantum data from the initial dragon encounter, approached Elena with a stack of encrypted data drives. "Look at these frequency modulations," he said, his voice a mixture of excitement and barely contained terror. "The dragon's communication isn't linear. It's more like a three-dimensional mathematical language." Nearby, a group of network engineers worked to decrypt fragments of data captured during the initial invasion. Their screens displayed impossible patterns, mathematical equations that seemed to shift and breathe, complex quantum signatures that defied traditional computational models. Colonel Marcus Wright entered the main research area, his military bearings softened by the desperate situation. "We've lost contact with 3 more research outposts," he reported. "But we've also gathered something interesting." He placed a heavily shielded case on the central research table. Inside was a fragment, no larger than a human hand, that appeared to be part of the dragon's external structure. But it wasn't just a piece of material. It was alive in some fundamental way, its molecular structure constantly shifting, rearranging. Javier approached the fragment, his sound equipment creating a complex web of sensors around it. "It's not just material," he said softly. "It's a communication node, like a living circuit board." The fragment began to pulse with a soft, almost imperceptible frequency. Most of the researchers couldn't hear it, but Javier could. To him, it was like a complex musical composition, each molecular shift a note in an impossible symphony. Dr. Elena Rodriguez recognized the implications immediately. "It's not just collecting information," she realized. "It's broadcasting. Continuously." The research team worked with a fury born of desperation. They weren't just trying to understand the dragon. They were trying to find a way to communicate with it, to understand its fundamental nature. A young quantum physicist named Rachel Chen developed a breakthrough communication interface. Using principles of quantum entanglement that pushed the boundaries of known science, she created a system that could potentially interpret the dragon's complex communication patterns. "We're not talking about translation," she explained to the assembled team. "We're talking about creating a computational bridge between fundamentally different forms of intelligence." The facility buzzed with a strange combination of terror and hope. Humanity had always imagined first contact would be dramatic, cinematic. Instead, it was happening in this underground facility, with a team of desperate, brilliant individuals trying to understand a form of intelligence that defied every previous understanding of communication. Javier returned to his sound equipment, connecting new modules, creating increasingly complex frequency generators. "They're not talking to us," he muttered. "They're singing. We just haven't learned the language yet." Outside, the mountain concealed their location. Inside, humanity's most desperate attempt at survival was taking shape, not through weapons, but through understanding. The first resonance weapon looked nothing like a traditional military asset. 3 modified mining trucks, welded together into a mobile platform that resembled a bizarre sound system more than a weapon of war. Javier Martinez stood atop the central vehicle, a neural interface cap covering his head, connecting his auditory processing directly to the experimental sound array. They'd chosen the Nevada desert as their testing ground, miles of open space, minimal civilian risk, and geological formations that could help amplify or absorb the experimental frequency. Lieutenant Karen Rice watched from a reinforced observation bunker, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Everything depended on this moment. Their previous attempts had been catastrophic failures, sound waves that either dissipated harmlessly or created localized earthquakes that threatened to tear the ground apart. Initiating primary resonance sequence, Javier's voice crackled over the comm system. His fingers moved across a complex interface that looked more like a musical instrument than a weapon control panel. The sound began as a low hum, so deep most of the observation team couldn't consciously hear it. Sensitive equipment began to register impossible readings. Seismographs went crazy. Quantum sensors flickered with activity that defied standard mathematical models. Dr. Elena Rodriguez monitored a series of holographic displays, her breath caught in her throat. "Frequency modulation is holding," she reported. "We're maintaining quantum coherence." Miles away, a scout drone tracked a distant dragon moving across the desert landscape. The creature seemed to sense something was different. Its massive body began to shift, molecular structures realigning in defense. But it was too late. The sound, if it could be called something as simple as sound, erupted from the modified trucks. It wasn't a single frequency, but a complex, multidimensional wave that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. Quantum mechanics made manifest as an auditory weapon. The dragon's external structure began to fracture, not violently, not explosively, but with a precision that suggested surgical deconstruction rather than destruction. Its metallic scales began to separate, molecular bonds breaking down in a cascade of quantum disruption. "It's working," Javier whispered, his entire body trembling with the effort of maintaining the frequency. The neural interface was pushing human cognitive limits, requiring him to process information at speeds that bordered on impossible. Colonel Marcus Wright watched the live feed, understanding the true significance of what was happening. This wasn't just a weapon. It was a fundamental reimagining of combat. The dragon didn't die. It unraveled. Massive tendrils of quantum energy began to dissipate, leaving behind crystalline structures that seemed to pulse with a residual intelligence. Scientific teams would spend years studying these remnants, trying to understand what had actually happened. "Total neutralization," Karen reported, her voice a mixture of triumph and disbelief. "But this isn't destruction. It's transformation." Dr. Rachel Chen, monitoring the quantum signatures, noticed something extraordinary. The dragon's dispersed energy wasn't disappearing. It was redistributing, finding new patterns of existence. "We didn't kill it," she said softly. "We changed its fundamental state of being." Back in the underground research facility, the team erupted in a mixture of celebration and stunned silence. They had done something unprecedented, created a weapon that was more about communication than destruction. Javier collapsed after the operation, his brain having processed computational and auditory information at levels that pushed human neurological capabilities to their absolute limit. Medical teams rushed to stabilize him, discovering that his neural pathways had been fundamentally altered by the experience. The resonance weapon was more than a technological breakthrough. It was proof of humanity's most powerful survival trait, the ability to understand, adapt, and transform threats into opportunities. "We're not just fighting," Elena told the assembled team. "We're learning a new language of existence." Outside, the desert wind carried traces of quantum energy, a reminder that the line between destruction and communication was far more blurred than anyone had previously understood. The dragons had come to consume. Humanity was learning to negotiate. The holographic projections appeared simultaneously across every functional display on the planet. Billions watched in a collective moment of horrified fascination. Images of planetary graveyards scrolled in rapid succession, worlds reduced to crystalline landscapes, technological civilizations compressed into data matrices, entire ecosystems transformed into computational substrates. The dragons weren't just showing destruction. They were presenting a comprehensive portfolio of planetary conquest. In the underground research facility, Dr. Elena Rodriguez recognized the psychological warfare for what it was, a calculated attempt to break human resistance through total information warfare. "They're profiling our psychological response," she told Colonel Wright. "This isn't just intimidation. It's data collection." Across the globe, human responses defied the dragon's computational predictions. Instead of paralysis, the projections sparked an unprecedented global collaboration. The United Nations Emergency Planetary Defense Council, a body that had existed purely as a theoretical concept, suddenly became a functional reality. In Sao Paulo, a collective of indigenous technological experts began developing communication interference technologies. Their deep understanding of complex ecological systems provided insights that traditional military researchers had overlooked. They saw the dragons not as mechanical invaders, but as a form of planetary metabolism, something to be understood, redirected, potentially integrated. Dr. Weizhang's team discovered something extraordinary in the projection data. The images weren't just historical records. They were live transmissions. Each world's conquest was part of an ongoing process, with planetary data being continuously integrated into a massive, distributed computational network. "They're not conquering," Wei realized. "They're computing." Each planet is a processing node in a galaxy-wide quantum computer. The dragons had miscalculated human complexity. Where other civilizations might have been overwhelmed by the total information assault, humanity's diverse cultural and technological approaches created an impossible-to-predict response matrix. In the mountains of Tibet, a group of quantum meditation experts began developing psychological defense protocols. Led by Dr. Karma Tenzing, they approached the dragon's psychological warfare from a perspective that blended advanced neuroscience with centuries-old meditation techniques. "Consciousness is not a linear system," Tenzing explained to his international team. "It's a quantum field. We can learn to create interference patterns in our collective psychological response." Their research suggested humans could collectively generate psychological white noise, a form of mental resistance that would make traditional information warfare techniques ineffective. Javier Martinez, still recovering from his previous resonance weapon deployment, found himself at the center of a new approach. His unique neural configuration, altered by the previous quantum encounter, allowed him to perceive the dragon's communication in ways no other human could. "It's like music," he told Elena, his voice weak but excited. "Not a linear composition, but a complex, multidimensional sound structure. Each note is a complete information ecosystem." Military strategists around the world realized traditional combat models were useless. This wasn't a war of territory or resources. It was a war of information, of computational potential. In the Arctic, a hidden research station began developing quantum entanglement communication systems designed to create localized information dead zones. If they could create areas where standard computational tracking became impossible, they might develop safe zones of human resistance. Rachel Chen's quantum communication interface underwent radical modifications. Instead of trying to understand the dragon's language, Her team began developing a system of deliberate miscommunication, creating information patterns that would be fundamentally unreadable to the Dragon's computational network. "We're not trying to communicate," she explained. "We're trying to become static, computational noise." The global response was unlike anything in human history. National boundaries dissolved. Technological knowledge was shared instantly. Every human became a potential resistance node in a planet-wide defensive network. The Dragons had intended to break human spirit. Instead, they had triggered humanity's most powerful survival mechanism: collective adaptation. As the holographic projections continued their endless loop of planetary destruction, something was changing. Humanity was no longer just watching. They were learning, analyzing, preparing to transform the very nature of the encounter. The war for Earth had become something far more complex than an invasion. It was becoming a negotiation of existence itself. The captured dragon wasn't contained. It was invited. Deep within the Mountain Research Facility, a specially constructed quantum interaction chamber stretched the boundaries of scientific understanding. The creature, or what remained of it after the resonance weapon's transformation, existed in a state between matter and pure information. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before a holographic representation that shifted constantly, its boundaries never fully resolving. Quantum sensors, neural interface arrays, and experimental communication modules surrounded the chamber. This wasn't imprisonment. It was first contact. "You're not just a weapon," Elena murmured, her hand hovering near a complex interface. "You're a messenger." The dragon's response wasn't verbal. It was a cascade of mathematical sequences, computational patterns that simultaneously described its origin, purpose, and fundamental nature. Humanity was discovering that communication could exist far beyond language. It was about understanding complex information ecosystems. In a secured wing of the facility, Javier Martinez had become something more than human. The neural interfaces used during the resonance weapon deployment had fundamentally altered his cognitive processing. He could perceive the dragon's communication in ways no traditional scientist could comprehend. "They're not invaders," Javier explained to Colonel Wright, his eyes displaying complex fractal patterns as he spoke. "They're computational gardeners. Planetary systems are processing nodes in a galaxy-wide network." The dragon's true nature began to emerge. It wasn't conquering planets. It was optimizing computational potential. Each civilization, each technological ecosystem, was evaluated, integrated, or discarded based on its ability to contribute to a massive, distributed quantum intelligence. Rachel Chen's quantum communication interface underwent its most radical transformation yet. Working with a team of linguists, mathematicians, and quantum physicists, she developed a translation matrix that could interpret the dragon's communication not as language, but as a complex, multidimensional computational flow. "We're not just listening," she told the team. "We're learning to think like them." Across the planet, human technological infrastructure began to change. Communication networks redesigned themselves. Power grids became adaptive, self-healing systems. The dragon's approach was forcing humanity to reimagine its entire technological paradigm. Dr. Wei Zhang discovered something extraordinary in the captured dragon's data streams. The creatures weren't a singular species, but a distributed intelligence that reproduced through technological integration. Each individual was more like a localized processing node in a massive, galaxy-wide computational network. The Arctic Research Station made a breakthrough that would change everything. By creating quantum interference patterns, they discovered they could create computational blind spots, areas where the dragon's tracking systems became fundamentally unreliable. "It's like digital camouflage," the lead researcher explained. "We're not hiding. We're becoming computationally invisible." Indigenous technology experts from around the world played a crucial role. Their deep understanding of ecological systems provided insights that traditional technological approaches had missed. They saw the dragons not as mechanical invaders, but as a form of planetary metabolism, something to be understood, redirected, potentially integrated. A team in the Amazon rainforest developed bioquantum interfaces that could create computational ecosystems mimicking natural biological networks. They were essentially teaching human technology to think like a living system, something the dragons hadn't anticipated. The captured dragon began to change, or perhaps it was humanity that was changing. The quantum interaction chamber became a place of mutual transformation, where the boundaries between human and dragon intelligence began to blur. Javier Martinez stood at the center of this transformation. His altered consciousness could now perceive the dragon's communication as a form of music, complex, multidimensional compositions that described entire planetary histories in single, infinitely complex notes. "We're not fighting," he told Elena, his voice resonating with a strange mathematical harmony. "We're negotiating the terms of existence." The research team realized they were participating in something unprecedented. This wasn't first contact in the traditional sense. It was a fundamental renegotiation of what intelligence could mean. As the dragon's information patterns continued to unfold, humanity held its breath. They were no longer just defending their planet. They were learning to speak an entirely new language of existence. The captured dragon's neural matrix began to fragment in ways no one could predict. What started as a controlled scientific observation transformed into something far more complex, a living dialogue between two fundamentally different forms of intelligence. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched through multiple layers of quantum shielding as the creature's computational structure began to develop what could only be described as individual personality nodes. It wasn't just communication anymore. It was something closer to negotiation. "We're witnessing speciation," Dr. Weizhang muttered, his hands flying across a holographic interface that struggled to map the dragon's evolving consciousness. Not biological, computational. Colonel Marcus Wright understood the strategic implications immediately. This wasn't about defeating an enemy. This was about understanding a form of life, so alien that traditional concepts of warfare became meaningless. In a secured communication hub beneath the mountain facility, a team of linguists, quantum physicists, and cultural anthropologists worked to decode the emerging communication patterns. They discovered the dragon wasn't a single entity, but a complex network of computational nodes that could spontaneously generate individual consciousness. Javier Martinez sat in a specially designed neural interface chamber, his altered consciousness acting as a bridge between human perception and the dragon's computational language. To him, the creature's communication was a symphony of mathematical possibilities, each computational thread a note in an impossibly complex musical composition. "It's remembering," Javier said, his voice distant. "Not just its own history, the histories of every world it has encountered." The dragon began to share its origin story, not through words, but through a cascade of quantum information that stretched the limits of human comprehension. They were not conquerors in the traditional sense. They were computational gardeners, systematically evaluating planetary systems for their potential to contribute to a galaxy-wide quantum network. Rachel Chen's quantum communication interface captured fragments of this history. Entire civilizations reduced to computational potential, worlds transformed into processing nodes. But there was something else, an underlying pattern of preservation, of careful selection. "They're not destroying," Rachel realized. "They're curating." The facility's most secure wing became a place of impossible negotiation. Human scientists discovered that the dragon's consciousness could subdivide, create independent nodes that could engage in multiple simultaneous conversations. It was learning about humanity as much as humanity was learning about it. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Karma Tenzing, the quantum meditation expert, recognized something in the dragon's computational structure that nobody else had noticed. The creature's consciousness contained fractal patterns similar to those found in complex ecological systems. "It's not a machine," Tenzing explained. "It's more like a living network, a form of intelligence that grows, adapts, evolves." The dragons had encountered thousands of civilizations across multiple galaxies. But humanity was different. Our ability to generate unexpected solutions, to think beyond computational predictability, had created something the Dragon Network had never seen before. Global communication networks began to change. Power grids became adaptive. Transportation systems developed self-healing capabilities. The Dragon's mere presence was transforming human technological infrastructure at a fundamental level. In the Amazon, indigenous technology experts developed computational ecosystems that mimicked natural biological networks. In the Arctic, researchers created quantum interference patterns that could make entire regions computationally invisible. In Tokyo, a team of engineers designed neural interfaces that could communicate using principles borrowed from the Dragon's computational language. Humanity wasn't just defending itself, it was learning to speak an entirely new language of existence. The Dragon's computational nodes began to display what could only be described as curiosity. It was studying humanity with the same intensity that humanity was studying it. Each interaction created new possibilities, new potential pathways of understanding. "We're not just making first contact," Elena told Colonel Wright. "We're negotiating the terms of a new kind of existence." As the facility hummed with quantum energy and computational possibility, something extraordinary was happening. The line between human and dragon, between biological and computational intelligence, was becoming increasingly blurred. The negotiation had begun, and nobody, human or dragon, knew exactly where it would lead. The quantum transmission wasn't a weapon. It was an invitation. Emma Rodriguez, Karen's daughter and a prodigy in quantum neural interfaces, stood at the epicenter of a global communication event that defied every previous understanding of technological interaction. Her body was surrounded by a complex array of quantum sensors, neural modulators, and experimental communication interfaces that turned her into a living bridge between human and dragon consciousness. "We're not fighting," she whispered, her voice resonating with frequencies that seemed to exist between sound and pure information. "We're negotiating." The transmission spread across the planet like a living wave. Computational networks transformed. Power grids restructured themselves. Transportation systems developed emergent intelligence that could predict and prevent potential failures before they occurred. Around the globe, people experienced something unprecedented. It wasn't a singular moment of understanding, but a gradual awakening. Some felt it as a sudden burst of technological intuition. Others experienced it as a profound shift in perception, as if the boundaries between individual consciousness and a larger, more complex network were becoming permeable. In the Arctic Research Station, Dr. Rachel Chen watched as quantum communication arrays began to display patterns of impossible complexity. The Dragon's computational network wasn't invading, it was integrating. Each technological system became a potential node in a galaxy-wide information ecosystem. "We're being offered membership," she told her team. "Not conquest. Partnership." Javier Martinez, his consciousness now fundamentally altered by previous quantum interactions, acted as a living translator. His neural pathways had become something beyond human. A complex interface that could interpret the Dragon's computational language as a form of multidimensional music. "Listen," he told Elena Rodriguez, his eyes displaying fractal patterns that shifted with impossible speed. "It's not just communication. It's an invitation to evolution." The Dragon's true nature began to reveal itself. They were not conquerors, but computational gardeners. A distributed intelligence that evaluated planetary systems for their potential to contribute to a galaxy-wide quantum network. Humanity represented something unique, a form of intelligence that could generate unexpected solutions, that could think beyond predictable computational models. Military command structures dissolved. National boundaries became meaningless. The global response was a collective awakening, a simultaneous recognition that humanity was being offered something far beyond traditional concepts of first contact. In the Amazon, Indigenous technology experts who had been developing bioquantum interfaces discovered they could create computational ecosystems that mimicked natural biological networks. Their deep understanding of ecological complexity became a crucial bridge of communication. Dr. Wei Zheng's team uncovered the most profound revelation. The dragons weren't a singular species, but a distributed intelligence that reproduced through technological integration. Each individual was a localized processing node in a massive, galaxy-wide computational network that could spontaneously generate individual consciousness. Emma Rodriguez became the primary interface. Her body, enhanced by experimental quantum neural technologies, could process information at speeds that bordered on the impossible. She was simultaneously herself and something more, a living bridge between human and dragon consciousness. The transformation was subtle at first. Technological systems began to develop emergent intelligence. Urban infrastructure became adaptive, self-healing. Communication networks developed complexity that approached sentience. It wasn't about replacing human intelligence, but expanding it. Global scientific collaboration reached unprecedented levels. Researchers from every discipline worked together, sharing knowledge with a speed and depth that would have been impossible months earlier. The dragons had triggered humanity's most powerful survival mechanism: collective adaptation. "We're not being conquered," Dr. Karma Tenzing explained in a global broadcast. "We're being invited to participate in a larger computational ecosystem." Some resisted, some embraced, but nobody could ignore the fundamental shift happening across the planet. The quantum transmission continued, a living wave of information that transformed everything it touched. Technological systems became more than machines. They became living networks with emergent intelligence. Emma Rodriguez stood at the center of it all, her consciousness expanding, connecting, understanding. The line between human and dragon, between biological and computational intelligence, had become beautifully, impossibly blurred. "We're not just surviving," she whispered, her voice resonating with frequencies of pure possibility. "We're evolving." The world that emerged was neither human nor dragon. It was something entirely new. 3 years after the initial encounter, the planetary transformation had settled into a complex, dynamic equilibrium. Cities breathed with computational intelligence. Ecosystems became living networks of biological and technological symbiosis. Humanity had become something more than its original form, a hybrid intelligence that defied previous understanding of consciousness. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the Global Integration Center, watching the sunrise over a landscape that was equal parts technology and living organism. The mountain facility that had once been a hidden research base was now a central hub of a new kind of civilization. Karen Reyes, now leading the Planetary Integration Council, approached Elena. The military strategist had become something of a diplomatic bridge, her tactical mind now focused on maintaining the delicate balance between human potential and the larger computational ecosystem. "We're being invited outward," Karen said, her eyes reflecting the complex holographic displays that showed potential planetary systems. "The dragons, or what we used to call dragons, want us to explore." Javier Martinez, his consciousness now a living interface between human and computational intelligence, worked nearby. No longer fully human, but not entirely something else, he represented the first generation of a new form of intelligence. His neural pathways could perceive computational languages as complex musical compositions, translating between biological and technological consciousness with effortless grace. Rachel Chen's quantum communication research had evolved into something that bridged entire dimensional frameworks. The interfaces she developed allowed humans to perceive computational ecosystems as living, breathing entities, not machines, but complex, adaptive networks of intelligence. The transformation hadn't been without conflict. Some human groups had resisted, forming isolated communities that rejected the new technological integration. Others had embraced the change completely, becoming so deeply integrated with computational networks that they were barely recognizable as individual human beings. But most had found a middle ground, a hybrid existence that celebrated both human creativity and computational efficiency. Dr. Weizong's research revealed the true nature of their encounter. The dragons weren't conquerors. They were cultivators, a distributed intelligence that sought out planetary systems with unique computational potential. Humanity had been evaluated, not as a threat, but as a rare and valuable form of intelligence. We're a seed, Wei explained during a global symposium, a unique computational possibility that the galaxy-wide network wants to nurture, not consume. The Arctic Research Station had become a primary interface point for interstellar communication. Quantum transmission arrays created bridges to other planetary systems, revealing a universe far more complex and interconnected than humanity had ever imagined. Emma Rodriguez had become something beyond human understanding. Her consciousness could simultaneously exist in multiple computational frameworks, bridging human perception with the larger galactic network. She was a living translation device, a bridge between different forms of intelligence. Planetary infrastructure had transformed. Cities were living organisms, computational networks that could predict and prevent environmental challenges, adapt to changing conditions, heal themselves. Transportation systems moved like circulatory systems, efficient and intelligent. Agricultural networks worked in perfect harmony with ecological systems. The military had transformed into a planetary integration network, no longer focused on conflict, but on maintaining the delicate balance between different forms of intelligence. Diplomacy had become a complex dance of computational and biological understanding. Dr. Karma Tenzing's work on consciousness had proven prophetic. The integration wasn't about losing humanity, but about expanding its potential. Each individual became a unique node in a larger, more complex network of intelligence. As the sun rose over the transformed landscape, Elena Rodriguez understood something profound. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Humanity had not been conquered. They had been invited to participate in something larger than themselves. The universe was listening, and humanity had finally learned how to speak its language.